translation. Purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. King Dusmanta replied, O Sakuntala, with beautiful eyebrows, you have taken your birth in the family of the great sage Vishvamitra, and your reception is quite worthy of your family. Aside from this, the daughters of a king generally select their own husbands. Purport. In her reception of Maharaj Dusmanta, Sakuntala clearly said, Your Majesty may stay here, and you may accept whatever reception I can offer. Thus she indicated that she wanted Maharaj Dusmanta as her husband. As far as Maharaj Dusmanta was concerned, he desired Sakuntala as his wife from the very beginning, as soon as he saw her. So the agreement to unite as husband and wife was natural. To induce Sakuntala to accept the marriage, Maharaj Dusmanta reminded her that as the daughter of a king, she could select her husband in an open assembly. In the history of Aryan civilization, there have been many instances in which famous princesses have selected their husbands in open competitions. For example, it was in such a competition that Sita Devi accepted Lord Ramachandra as her husband, and that Draupadi accepted Arjuna. And there are many other instances. So marriage by agreement or by selecting one's own husband in an open competition is allowed. There are 8 kinds of marriage, of which marriage by agreement is called Gandharva marriage. Generally, the parents select the husband or wife for their daughter or son, but Gandharva marriage takes place by personal selection. Still, although marriage by personal selection or by agreement took place in the past, we find no such thing as divorce by disagreement. Of course, divorce by disagreement took place among low-class men, but marriage by agreement was found even in the very highest classes, especially in the royal Kshatriya families. Maharaj Dusmanta's acceptance of Sakuntala as his wife was sanctioned by Vedic culture. How the marriage took place is described in the next verse. So, the next verse we heard how the way they did the marriage was that they mutually agreed, and then the king, who knew the laws of marriage, chanted the Vedic pranava, Omkara, and in that way summoned the presence of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who ordained the marriage, and therefore it was done by religious principles according to that method. So, so just going back a little bit, in the last chapter we saw how, because this verse is about marriage, and we saw an interesting marriage in the last chapter between Yayati and Devayani, right? So although that marriage seemed to be infused with a lot of passion and material desire, lust basically, but still, because it was done religiously, and because we hear in the last chapter how Yayati, during his Grihastha ashram, was worshipping the Lord. He was doing different yagyas and processes that were recommended during that age for worshipping the Lord. And therefore, by the grace of the Lord, he was able to develop detachment from his wife and move on into the renounced order, at least into Vanaprastha ashram. And before he did that, he also spoke to Devayani. He narrated that whole story of the he-goat and the she-goat, which is none other than Yayati himself and Devayani, to basically tell the whole story of how they got together, how they lived through their married life, and how they gradually realized that that real happiness is not to be found in sense gratification. So that was by the grace of the Lord. It doesn't always work out, right? If you're not worshipping the Lord, then you won't necessarily come to that conclusion that sense gratification is a waste of time and that you should just better renounce. People who are grihamedis, who are just materialistic householders, who are atheists, they will be frustrated with their partner, and they'll blame it on the partner that they're not happy in the marriage, and then they'll get a divorce and try to find another partner, thinking that then they'll finally be happy. And so they go through a series of marriage, divorce, and they end up always frustrated. But that frustration is built into the system. So if someone is in Grihastha ashram and feeling frustrated, like, oh, it wasn't all that I thought it would be, all my dreams didn't come true in this relationship, then that means you're doing things right. If there's some frustration in your relationship, in your household or life, then that's a good thing. And it's meant to help us to realize that, sense gratification is not the pathway to happiness. That happiness comes through worshiping the Lord. And if we're worshipping the Lord during Grihastha life, then we'll come to that right conclusion. We'll be like, oh, why did I ever dedicate myself to sense gratification? Why didn't I just fully dedicate myself to worshipping the Lord? And then you'll think, well, it's not too late, right? Now I'm getting older. I've had my career. I've put aside some money. My children are grown up. I can, leave my wife in the good hands of my grown-up children and leave them with, a good portion of my income so that they're taken care of, and I can just go off to take vanaprastha, rededicate myself fully to the worship of the Lord, practice celibacy, detachment, and absorption in Krishna. So that's basically what Yayati did. And he focused his mind, totally absorbed in thoughts of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and then he left his body. Because the thing is with Yayati, he had exchanged his old age with his youngest son Puru. So till that time he was actually a young man. His senses were fully, youthful and strong. And so when he came to that realization that no matter how young and strong and full of life he wasn't going to be happy through just using his young body for sense gratification. He thought, well, what's the use of this young body? Better let me give it back to Puru, take on my old age, and leave this world and go back to Godhead. So that's what he did. He gave his Puru back his youth. He installed Puru as the king, even though that's kind of uncustomary that the youngest son will be the king, but because he was so grateful to Puru for taking his old age, that he awarded him with the kingdom. So Puru became the head of the dynasty, and Yayati went back to Godhead. And because he gave that whole lecture to Devayani before leaving, and Devayani also became self-realized, and she also dedicated herself to meditation on the Lord, and she followed the footsteps of her good husband, and she also got liberated from this cycle of repeated birth and death. So that was a happy ending to their very interesting that saga. So now Puru is the king, and we're hearing about his dynasty, which is a great dynasty, because many great personalities take birth in the Puru dynasty, and we're hearing now about Dusmanta. So of course there's a whole list, and we can hear we get a sense of how Shukadeva Goswami is kind of hurrying through these. He's listing off a lot of names, right? We read a lot of names. So he's kind of like rushing this, because he's speaking to Maharaj Parikshit. Maharaj Parikshit only has 7 days left to live, and he needs to hear about the pastimes of Krishna, right? Krishna's leelas that are coming, the 10th canto, which is coming up soon. So you can imagine how Shukadeva Goswami, who's a pure devotee of Krishna, who is one of Radharani's pet parrots in Goloka Vrindavan, is very eager to narrate Radha Krishna Leela, and beginning from Krishna's birth and all of Krishna's pastimes. And so he's kind of like, speeding it up. But he doesn't want to miss out on any very significant events that happen in that family lineage. So he's pausing here on Dusmanta. So Dusmanta was a great king, and he was out hunting, as kings sometimes do. And he came upon a hermitage, and he thought, okay, this is a good place to rest a little, get something to eat, get something to drink. And so he approaches the hermitage of Kanva Muni, and then he notices that there's a beautiful young woman there by the name of Sakuntala, and he's immediately attracted to Shakuntala's beauty, and she also is attracted to him, and she invites him in. She offers him, Vedic hospitality, a sitting place, something to drink, something to eat, sweet words. But then it's very quickly apparent there's a little more there than hospitality, that the two of them are kind of like love at first sight, and so they both in subtle, discreet ways acknowledge that and communicate that to each other. And so they basically agree, they both express their desire to marry each other. And so the king, he knows how to do this, so he enacts the Gandharva rite for Gandharva Vivaha, marriage. And it's interesting here that, so everything is done very quickly, just in the space of probably a few hours there that evening. And but Dusmanta, you can see that he's a devotee, because he, in part of the marriage ceremony, he invokes the presence of the Lord. So he chants the Omkara, the Vedic mantra, which Om is not different from Krishna, and it's basically not different from the Hare Krishna mantra, although the Hare Krishna mantra is a little more than Om, because Om can often be interpreted in an impersonal way, whereas Hare Krishna is very much personal. We call the personal names of Krishna. You've got Hare. So they say Om is 3 syllables. A, U, M. Right? So it's actually 3 syllables put together. And that A is said to stand for Srimati Radharani, or the energy of the Lord. And then U is Krishna, and then M is the Jiva. So everything is contained within those 3 syllables. There's the Lord, his energies, headed by his Adi Shakti, which is Srimati Radharani, and then the Jivas, which is us. So everything is there in Om. But if you don't know that, then Om can seem to be like an impersonal, just an impersonal spiritual sound vibration. So the Hare Krishna mantra is better because it's more specific, it's more focused on the goal. Anyways, Maharishi Dusmanta invokes the presence of the Lord. They have their Gandharva marriage, and then during that night they get together, and Sakuntala becomes pregnant, and then they have a child who turns out to be Bharat. So this is the Bharat, famous Bharat, whom India is named after as Bharatvarsha. He becomes the next king, and he's such a great king that the world, basically the whole world at that time, is called Bharatvarsha. So then Shakuntala is telling what's his name? King Dusmanta, sorry, that she's introducing herself, that I'm the daughter of Vishvamitra, and my mother is Menika, but they left her in the forest. And she didn't know that because they left her in the forest when she was a newborn baby. So she's saying that the sage Kanva Muni knows all of this. And because it was Kanva Muni who told her later on that he raised her, and he said, by the way, your parents are Vishvamitra Muni and Menika. So there's also a story about that. So what happened is that Vishvamitra, he was a king. He was called Kaushik, King Kaushik. He was a great king. And one day he also was out hunting, and he went to the ashram of Vishish Muni. So Vishish Muni, you may know, he's the guru of Lord Ramachandra. So he goes to Vishish Muni's place, and Vishish Muni receives him very well, offers him food, drink, sitting place, everything. And then Vishvamitra Muni becomes curious, like, how is it that out here in the forest you have so much opulence, you have everything here at your disposal, very conveniently. And he said, oh, I have this cow, this wish-fulfilling Surabhi cow. And so Vishvamitra Muni, he thinks, oh, well, I'm the king. How is it that one of my subjects, so he's thinking that he's a little arrogant, how is it that one of my subjects has something better than anything that I have? He has opulence greater than I have, because this cow can supply absolutely anything he desires. This cow should be mine. All wonderful things in the kingdom should be offered to the king. So then he tells Brahman sage Vashish that, and Vashish just kind of like doesn't really agree. And then Vishvamitra just by force tries to take the cow. So then from that cow she could produce not just milk or not just food, but she immediately started producing all these soldiers, this army. And then the army produced from the cow started fighting against Vishvamitra, and they defeated him. So that happened a couple of times. He came back, and again, after being defeated, tried to take the cow. Anyways, it was a disaster. So then Vishvamitra Muni, he was like, well, I can't defeat him by force, but I'm appreciating how these Brahmins have more power than the Kshatriyas. Before I was thinking that the Brahmins were depending on the Kshatriyas, and now I'm seeing that this Brahman Tejas is actually something extraordinary. So, I want to be the most powerful person, so therefore let me be a Brahmin. I want to be a Brahmin. So then he started performing all these austerities to try to, become a Brahmin, thinking that you become a Brahmin by austerity. So he's doing these very severe austerities, and for a long period of time, and he's getting power. He's getting some Shakti from those austerities, as happens. That's what austerities do. And so Indra, up in Swargaloka, the king of heaven, he's becoming worried that, oh no, this king, because after all, he's not a Brahmin, he's a king. So if this king gets too much power, then he's going to do what kings do when they become very powerful, which is take over other kings' kingdoms. And he's afraid that he's going to go and, declare war on Lord Indra and defeat him and take over his heavenly kingdom. So then he says, I need to stop this guy before he gets too powerful. So then he sends Menika, who's a celestial damsel from the heavenly planets, very, very beautiful, and much more beautiful than any earthly women. So he sends this Menika to distract Vishvamitra from his austerities. And so it works. She goes down there and she's putting on all of her charm, all of her beauty, singing songs and tinkling her ankle bells and things. And Vishvamitra becomes attracted, and he ends up, renouncing his austerities and going off with Menika. And they have a child who is a daughter, Sakuntala. And then because Menika, she wasn't there to stay, she was just on a mission. Her home is not on Earth, it's in the heavenly planet. So as soon as the mission was accomplished, she went back to Swarga, she went back to the heavenly planets. And Vishvamitra also disappeared. And so this baby girl was just left there in the forest. And Kanva Muni found her there, and he could be that, we don't know the details, at least I don't know the details. Could be that Vishvamitra was like, I have this little girl, her mother went away, I don't know what to do with her. Can you take care of her? So anyway, somehow or other, Kanva, also because he's a sage, he knows a lot of these sages were Trikala, they knew past, present, and future. So he understood the situation. He knew who her parents were. He knew she was basically orphaned, and so he took care of her. So that's how she got to be there. And anyway, so Dusmanta, what we're hearing about is these different kinds of marriage. Prabhupada talks about the different kinds of marriage that there are, and how one of them is the Gandharva marriage. So sometimes this is called love marriage, right? And it's not the best kind of marriage, but it's okay. Especially if it's done properly. And the Swayamvar that the Kshatriyas would do is a type of love marriage. And because it's marriage by agreement, it's not marriage by arrangement. But the good thing about the Swayamvar system is better than just straight up Gandharva love marriage, because it's moderated by the parents, and the king he'll basically set the context, he'll establish what the competition is going to be for his daughter, and then he'll be there, and there's still a sense in which the king hands the daughter over to the qualified person. So it's kind of like a mix between Gandharva marriage and the Brahma marriage. Brahma marriage is the best. That's generally what the Brahmins do, or sometimes Kshatriyas do this, is that they'll find a qualified young man and they'll just give the daughter. So it's more about the person's qualifications, that the person's been studied by the parents, and they'll give the daughter. So then there are other kinds of marriage, like the Rakshasa marriage, which is done by kidnapping or abducting. So a good example of that is Rukmini and Krishna. So Krishna goes and does the Rakshasa Vivaha, and kidnaps Rukmini. And of course, when Krishna does, everything that Krishna does is good, and Rukmini turns out is his eternal consort, so nothing wrong with that. There's also a kind of marriage that's called Prajapatya Vivaha, which is based on duty. So if there's a young man and he's given a very responsible duty, and he needs help with that duty, then he'll be given a wife for support in fulfilling his responsibilities. So an example of that is Priyavrata. So Priyavrata he was born in a Kshatriya family, but his spiritual master was Narada Muni. So Narada Muni is very famous for preaching to all of these young Kshatriya boys and getting them to renounce and go and just live in the forest and take sannyas and devote themselves to bhakti. So that's what he did with Priyavrata, and Priyavrata he had already given up everything. He'd gone to the forest. He didn't like take sannyas or anything, but he was living in the forest and focusing on meditation on the Lord. And then the problem was that his father, Swayambhuva Manu, it was time for him to retire, and he needed someone to rule the kingdom. So then he went to his son and he said, "Son, I need you to take responsibility here for the kingdom." And he said, "What can I do? My guru has given me this order." And so then Swayambhuva Manu went to talk to Narada Muni, and it was kind of like a little bit of a tension there between the two of them, whether he should renounce or whether he should take the kingdom. And then Swayambhuva Manu was like, "I'm not getting anywhere with Narada Muni, I need to call upon somebody a little higher." So then he goes to Lord Brahma, who is the father of both of them. And he says, "Brahma, I need your help to convince Narada to let my son be the king." So Brahma comes down and they have this whole conversation. And anyways, it's agreed upon. And one thing that they, is learned in that lesson is that Brahma says that you can still be renounced. You can be the king, and you can also be renounced. You can be a Raja Rishi, you can be a Rajarshi, and you can accept the kingdom and accept a wife and have children and do all these things. So externally, you can appear like an ordinary person, but internally in your heart, then you can be detached. So that's what Priyavrata did. He accepted the king. And so he was given his wife, Varvishmati, in order to enable him to fulfill his responsibilities, because a king needs to be married. You can't have like a brahmachari king. Right? So a king needs to be married because there needs to be an heir to the throne. So they had children and all that. And Priyavrata was a good example of a Rajarshi, that he did all of his duties very responsibly. He was also affectionate towards his wife and children, but not attached. Right? So that's the thing. We need to be in Grihastha ashram. There should be affection without attachment. And often, if someone is actually not very advanced, then usually what happens in the relationship is that they won't be affectionate, but they'll still be attached. Right? They're attached, but they're pretending not to be. So then they won't be affectionate. But if somebody is actually renounced, they can be affectionate. Right? It's just like if you have a young brahmachari who's still disturbed by lust and material desires, then they will tend to be cold towards women because the attachment is there. And as soon as there'll be like a little bit of an exchange, then it flares up. So they need to protect themselves by kind of like being aloof and a little seemingly cold. But someone who is like a senior, mature, spiritually advanced renunciant, they can interact with women and be affectionate towards their female disciples, or women that they may be sharing Krishna consciousness with, because they're not attached, so it doesn't affect them. They don't become disturbed. So it's a question of spiritual maturity. So Priyavrata was a good example of that. Another way that marriage, sometimes we've seen marriages take place in the scriptures, is that the daughter is given like as a peace offering. I see that in a couple of situations. Can you think of any? Yeah, they mentioned.
Sharanamani was given the daughter.
Yeah. So, his daughter Sukanya was a young girl, maybe she was a teenage girl. And while her father was talking to, what was her father's name? I can't remember. Her father was talking her father was arriving at the place looking for Chavana Muni. Then Sukanya was just playing in the woods there because he was living in the forest ashram, and she found some glowworms. So she was just like, "Oh, what's making these little worms glow? This is interesting." She got a little stick and she poked the glowworm, and some whatever bodily fluid started oozing out of the glowworm because she punctured his skin. And then everyone and all of her father and all of his army became constipated, and it's like, what had happened? So there was some offense made. Sharyati, yeah, Sharyati. So King Sharyati, he was like, what's going on? And then he asked his daughter, did something happen? Did you do something? She said, I poked these glowworms. He was like, oh no. And then it turned out that the glowworm was Chavana Muni, because he was such a powerful Muni that he could actually change his form. He had changed into a glowworm, and she offended him by poking him. So then Sharyati was like, oh no, what am I going to do now? This is a great offense. She's my daughter, so I'm responsible. I'm going to get I'm going to get cursed. I'm going to get some, awful sinful reaction. And so he's like, I'm really sorry, oh sage, please accept my daughter as a peace offering, basically. And please accept my beautiful daughter in charity, and please forgive us. So that was one case. Yeah?
Satyabhama and Jamavati?
Yeah. Satyabhama, and she was the daughter of Satyajit. So Satyajit had wrongly accused Krishna of stealing this Shamataka jewel. So then later when they found out that Krishna was innocent, then Satyajit felt really terrible because he knew Krishna was a great personality, a very powerful person, and maybe even the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and now he had accused him. And so as a peace offering he gave his daughter Satyabhama. Jambavan also, right? He fought with Krishna, and then at the end he was like, oh my god, I just spent a whole month fighting with my Lord, who's no different from my worshipful Ishtadev, Lord Ramachandra, and he said he gave his daughter Jambavati. So there are different ways that marriage can take place. The way that in ISKCON we follow the system that Srila Prabhupada established for marriage, which is actually ideally it's more like the Brahma Vivaha, in that when a girl wants to get married, when she feels like she's at that stage in her life where she's ready for marriage, then she will consult with senior mentors, spiritual master, parents, especially if the parents are favorable, if they're devotees, and express that feeling like it's time for me to get married. And then the senior devotees will help her find a qualified person, and then approach that person and say, are you interested in getting married, blah, blah, blah. They'll check the astrological charts and all this. So it's very much moderated by the senior well-wishers. And then the daughter is basically handed over, right? There's that part of the marriage ceremony called Kanyadan, which means literally giving one's daughter. So the marriage is handed over to a qualified. So the emphasis is on finding a qualified person. So the man has to be qualified. And that's what the parents are looking for. That's what the gurus and mentors are looking for, is a qualified man who's a devotee, who will guide their daughter or devotee or disciple in spiritual life. And it's more like in the marriage ceremony, the presence of the Lord is invoked through the sacrificial fire. Offerings of ghee and grains are made into the fire. They take their vows in the presence of the Lord. And it's more like a partnership. It's like a spiritual partnership that we're going to serve Krishna together. We're going to support each other in our devotional service, and we're going to try to help each other go back home, back to Godhead at the end of this lifetime. So rather than being based on, mutual physical attraction and sense gratification, or marrying because the person has a lot of money, or because they have a political position, or something like that, which a lot of materialistic marriages are based on. And it's more of a spiritual partnership. We're going to support each other in Krishna service. We're going to help each other get back home, back to Godhead. We're going to raise children in Krishna consciousness and help them, become liberated from the cycle of birth and death as well. So it's a very glorious thing. And we see many examples of that, like we just did. And so that's kind of a high ideal, right? Realistically speaking, that's the ideal. Realistically speaking, when a young man and young woman get together with the idea of getting married, it's not always just, let's help each other go back home, back to Godhead, right? There's definitely some sparks flying, usually, and material desires there. But what we see in the previous chapter with Yayati and Devayani is that that's okay. It's okay to have material desires and just go with those material desires, and at the same time try one's best to worship Krishna and maintain one's initiation vows throughout Grihastha ashram, have an altar at home, worship the Lord, offer food to Krishna, and Krishna the Lord will, by the grace of the Lord, those material desires will subside, and a lot of realizations will take place, and gradually that detachment will come, just like it did with Yayati and Devyani, and they can go back to Godhead. So, yeah. So just a little bit about marriage and Krishna consciousness according to regular principles, as mentioned here in this section. So, any questions or comments? Yes, Chaitanya.
Yeah. Thank you. Very nice lecture. Thank you so much. It was a very good class. So my question is, I've heard in one of the Bhagavatam class in Shastra, the age of the husband should be always at least 8 years older, and then the wife and can marry a older female, and the male should be always older than the female, and the gap should be at least 8 years. Did you come across any of those in your?
I haven't seen that in the scriptures. Generally, what's given is that it generally works out best if the husband is superior, in different ways than the wife, right? Because the husband should be somebody that the wife can naturally look up to. So, in the Vedic system, it was that the husband should be of an equal or higher caste, right? Like a Brahmin man can marry a Kshatriya or Vaishya or Shudra woman, but not vice versa. Okay? So respect has to be there. Or, in ISKCON, the young woman should be looking for a husband who's a more advanced devotee. Right? Maybe if she just has first initiation, find someone who has second initiation, or find someone who's been in Krishna consciousness for a longer time, or someone who's just really good, sadhaka, and can inspire her in her spiritual life. Age is another factor, right? So naturally, these are things that kind of command respect, right? Is you're higher social, in the varnashram system, or higher age, or more spiritually advanced. And so that's what a young woman is looking for, right? Is someone who can be a source of inspiration, who can be an example. And then she can naturally follow in the footsteps. She'll naturally be inspired to serve, because we're trained to serve superiors, we're trained to serve senior devotees and elders, and right? So then everything becomes more natural and easy. But I never saw any specific age, like it has to be a certain number of years older. And I know even when Srila Prabhupada, when he was present, he would kind of match up his male and female disciples, and he performed a lot of marriages. And he didn't observe a year thing. I think there were some husbands and wives that were even, wife is older than the husband. I know, for example, Vaisheshika Prabhu, Nirakula Maji, is older than Vaisheshika Prabhu. So there's a few, I think it's more the exception than the rule, but there are some cases like that. Yeah. And it works out fine.
Yeah.
It just depends on with all these things, it depends on the individual too, right? The individual's disposition. And we see in the case of Vaisheshika Prabhu, there's no Mother Nirakula is super, respectful and inspired by her husband, even though he's maybe a couple years younger. It's not an issue. So, yeah. There's a number of categories, moderating factors. Yes?
Thank you for joining the class. I just, it was all about marriage, so I just wanted.
Speak a little louder.
It was all about marriage, so I was just wanting to know, so in ISKCON, why do girls specifically have to get married? Because I think the institution of sannyas is for males, but not for females. So females are wives. So why is it not for females?
Yeah.
Or
Because
the goal is to reach back to home, back to Godhead.
yeah.
So is it they need a husband, or why cannot it be done alone?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's not that on your own you can't go back to Godhead, that unless you get married you can't go back to Godhead. That's not the situation. The fact is, and the reason for it, is that women need to be protected. Right? So the Vedic system is all about protecting women, because women are physically weaker. A lot of women are also emotionally need support, and they need someone to kind of lean on times in their life. And so, women should be protected because unfortunately it's the material world and it's Kali Yuga, and there are a lot of men out there that will prey upon vulnerable women. And so, if you're walking down the street alone, it's dangerous, right, in most parts of the world, for a woman to just walk down the street at night. Whereas for a man, it's not so dangerous. There's always some danger there, but most, a strong, healthy male walking down the street at night is probably not going to be afraid if he sees like a man coming. He's walking on the sidewalk and the man is approaching him. He's not going to feel fear. Whereas a woman will feel fear, right? There'll be a little bit of okay, I hope this guy's okay, anything can happen right now. So, but if a woman is walking with her husband, she's not going to feel fear, right? So, that's just the fact that women need to be protected. And generally speaking, when a woman is married, she's happier, as long as the husband... Of course, nowadays there's a lot of unfortunate situations where the husband, who's supposed to be the protector of the wife, ends up being, person harming the wife. There's a lot of cases of domestic abuse, emotionally, physically, sexually, like that. So that's not what it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be that the man should protect the woman, and then everything works out nicely.
So to continue with her question, male has more chance to be renounced than woman by default, then, right? Because now women are, by system, are supposed to marry, and then now once they're married, they are more attached now by default with the kids, with the husband.
Yeah.
So their attachment is definitely increased after marriage. Whereas if they were not, then they can stay detached and can continue with their consciousness, spiritual consciousness.
Yeah, you could say that from that point of view, it seems that renunciation is easier for men. The thing is with women, the way female psychology works is that women internalize things a little more. If you notice, like with the varnashram system, there's a lot, when men change ashrams, there's more external symbolism involved, right? Like for example here, in the Toronto temple, there's brahmachari ashram, there's also brahmacharini ashram, right? But when a man decides to be a brahmachari, he puts on another color, right? It's a whole thing. Like there's a ceremony, and changes his cloth. There's like an external symbol to it. Whereas if a girl, decides I'm going to be a brahmacharini, I'm just going to dedicate, a year of my life or a couple of years to Krishna, then she just dresses like any other female devotee, right? And then when a man gets married, he changes his cloth. When a woman gets married, occasionally maybe she puts on a bindi, a sindu, or wears something, but there's not so much fanfare, And then when a man becomes renounced, there's a whole ceremony, sannyas flows, danda. Whereas when a woman renounces, there's not much difference, right? So generally speaking, I'm not sure if men need that to have that impetus to go up to the next ashram and keep moving forward, and that women just kind of naturally do that internally. But women can, I think it's not difficult for women to be renounced. They can be renounced, but it just looks different for women. Because there are many very, very advanced women who, are still, who are affectionate towards their families, they have grandchildren, and at the same time they're like sannyasis, and they don't see the grandchildren as their little possessions that they can enjoy, but they see them as these are souls, these are Krishna's eternal servants, and helping them to make spiritual advancement just like they would disciples or something, right?
So the attachment and affection is what you say.
What I was talking about, it's affection without attachment. So, and that's actually that's actually a higher level of detachment, is that you can be in the situation where all of the things for material enjoyment are there, but you're choosing not to enjoy them. You don't engage with them with a spirit of enjoyment. Right? That's yukta vairagya, that's real attachment. Rather than just, physically separating yourself from those things, but internally hankering for them. Right? So,
Well, can I? Please one.
I have a different.
So just follow this following up with this statement. Maybe if you correct me if I'm wrong. It's not like a man needs the external things to renounce, but I think it's more like a Vedic principles and Vedic rules and regulation for the man, which has been given in the scriptures. But unfortunately, not given for women. So.
But there's a reason for that. Anything that's in the scriptures, it's like that for a reason. So I think it's kind of like to encourage men to.
I think so. You're right.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Because it doesn't work like that, right? It's kind of like, when men, they're in a career, it's like they're seeking promotions, positions, they want their name over a door, or in the military, all these medals and different uniforms, the uniform changes, the color of the uniform changes when you step up. And, I don't know, just being a woman and knowing women don't really chase after those things. It's not really interested in having badges and medals and names and, things to publicly declare their position and things. It's just a different psychology.
Makes sense.
They're happy to just have friends and people that care about them.
And overall, I just had one more thing that Srila Prabhupada mentioned that it doesn't matter as male or female. In Western countries, part of the world, both male and female are very detached because they've been born like that and treated. They've been taught to be like that.
Where?
In Western countries.
In Western countries.
When the boy is 16 years or a girl is 16 years, they leave the family. But in India, it's too much.
Yeah.
And you're 40 or so, you're more attached to the parents. So for us, there's no detachment at all.
Yeah, I don't really understand all that. Because when I graduated from high school when I was 16, I went to college, and then, you go home for Christmas or something like that. But, it's like, and the parents also, they're like, if the child is, 19 years old and still living at home, it's like, when are you gonna, it's like, are you gonna live your life or what, Get out of here, get a job, get your own place.
Yep.
So it's, I guess it's helpful, right?
It's very helpful. Prabhupada says that it's easy.
And they don't try to control your life,
Right.
My parents were like, if you're happy, I'm happy. You can do whatever you want as long as you don't ask me for money.
Yes, right.
So,
I just remembered that point in which be it a man or a woman, Mahaprabhu has said that, especially in this yoga, taking sannyas is not recommended anyway.
mm-hmm.
So,
It's not.
Yeah, not for everyone.
But he took sannyas.
Yeah, for preaching purposes.
Yeah.
But generally he wanted us to follow Sankirtan Dharma.
Yeah. Well, what I learned is that, see, there's a verse from one of the scriptures that says that in this age of Kali, 4 or 5 things are forbidden, like horse sacrifices, and sannyas is one of them. That in Kali Yuga, sannyas is forbidden. But then the way I heard that explained from my teachers is that that applies to other spiritual paths, where like jnana yogis and dhyana yogis and karma yogis, but it doesn't apply to bhakti yogis, because bhakti is so powerful that it purifies the heart. And because in other paths, that purification of the heart is not so complete, and therefore the material desires remain. And so if they take sannyas and they still have material desires, then they're going to end up falling down. But if one is really performing bhakti with, intensity and concentration under proper guidance, according to religious principles, according to all the scriptural principles, then the heart becomes purified and those desires are totally destroyed at the root, and they can maintain their sannyas vows. So that verse applies to anyone except those practicing bhakti. So that's why, in our tradition we have sannyasis, right? Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur took sannyas, he was eager to give sannyas to his disciples. Srila Prabhupada took sannyas, he was eager to give sannyas to his disciples. And we continue with sannyas initiations. And yeah, there are some casualties, but we have many really glowing examples of glorious sannyasis in our movement, which attests to the power of bhakti. Okay, I think we should wrap this up. Contra Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Gaur Govinda.